The chandelier dripped light onto 22 place settings of polished silver and crystal. My father, Michael Vance, stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his voice full of a strength I hadn't heard since before the stroke. He raised his glass, a vintage Bordeaux I had personally sourced to celebrate the company's return to profitability. Tonight, he began, his eyes sweeping over the uncles, cousins, and old family friends gathered in the formal dining room, we don't just celebrate success. We pass the torch to the next generation. He turned, placing a hand on my brother Matthew's shoulder. Matthew, who had been home for exactly 6 weeks. Last week, I signed the final transfer documents. Everything in Vance Logistics, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, $112 million in total, now belongs to Matthew. A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. My mother, Jennifer, reached across the table and squeezed Matthew's hand, her knuckles white. She looked directly at me, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on her lips. He deserves it, she said, her voice carrying across the silence. He's a natural leader. Some people just aren't. The words landed like shards of ice. My uncle coughed, suddenly fascinated by his bread roll. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping lightly on the hardwood floor. The room went silent. Every eye was on me. I walked the length of the table, my heels sinking into the deep pile of the Persian rug, and stopped beside my father. One by one, I placed 3 things on the crisp white linen in front of him. First, the old, creased power of attorney, the one he and my mother had signed from their hospital beds 5 years ago when their hands shook too much to hold a pen. Second, the single key to the corporate headquarters, the one that opened every door from the loading bay to the executive suite. Third, a thick manila envelope, sealed with the dark red wax of my attorney's notary stamp. The wax gleamed under the chandelier light. I met Matthew's smug gaze. "Congratulations," I said, my voice quiet but clear. Then I turned and started for the door. I heard my father let out a short, dismissive laugh, the same sound he used to make when I was a child with an impossible idea. He thought it was a resignation letter, a dramatic, tear-stained goodbye. He picked up the envelope, slid a butter knife under the seal, and ripped it open. His eyes scanned the first line, then the second. The wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor and splashing red across the white baseboard. The sound echoed in the sudden, dead quiet. His face went white. He slammed his fist on the table so hard the plates jumped. "You have got to be kidding me," he roared, the sound tearing through the elegant room. My mother screamed, "Michael, what is it?" Ben froze, his smile gone. Every head in the room turned from my father's apoplectic face to me, my back still to them, walking away without breaking my stride. 5 years ago, I wasn't walking away from a disaster, I was running a 12-person data science team in San Francisco. My life was Series C funding rounds, keynote speeches, and a salary just shy of $300,000 a year. I lived in a bright apartment with a view of the bay and a calendar so full I had to schedule time to breathe. Then the phone rang at 5:47 in the morning. It was a charge nurse from a hospital back home. My father had collapsed. A massive ischemic stroke. By the time my flight landed 4 hours later, he was in a medically induced coma, machines breathing for him. 2 days after that, my mother went to the doctor for a persistent cough. Stage 3 lung cancer. Chemo started the next Monday. I took indefinite leave, packed 2 suitcases, and moved back into my childhood bedroom. The tech unicorn I worked for replaced me in 9 days. The first year was a blur of antiseptic smells and fluorescent lights. I learned to mix my mother's chemo drugs because the home health aide was always late. I learned to suction my father's trach tube when he choked in the middle of the night. I slept in a vinyl recliner next to his hospital bed for more than 300 nights, my laptop balanced on my knees, trying to keep up with the changing world I had left behind. When my father finally woke from the coma, the stroke had stolen his voice. He could squeeze my hand, twice for yes, once for no. My mother's hands trembled so much from the neuropathy that she couldn't sign her own name. The hospital's attorney sat me down and explained that without a valid power of attorney, the state would appoint a conservator to manage their affairs, including the family business. They signed the documents that afternoon, their shaky X's witnessed by 2 nurses. That piece of paper made me the acting CEO of Vance Logistics, a 90-person company bleeding cash, with no paycheck attached. I was 30 years old, teaching myself corporate finance from YouTube videos at 3 in the morning. I renegotiated contracts with shipping unions, fought with insurance companies over my mother's denied experimental treatments, and approved payroll for 90 families, all while my father watched me from his hospital bed with silent, desperate eyes. And my brother, Matthew? He was a ghost. The last we'd heard, he was somewhere in Arizona, deep in a cycle of rehab and relapse after an opioid addiction took hold. He'd ghosted us completely, not a single phone call, not even when he heard our parents were fighting for their lives. My mother kept his room like a shrine, pretending he was away at college instead of lost to the world. I didn't have time to worry about him. Every dollar I clawed back from the brink went to keeping the lights on at the company and paying for the therapies that were slowly, painstakingly, bringing my parents back to life. I was wrong to think that would be enough. It took 3.5 more years of 17-hour days, but I did it. I dragged Vance Logistics back from the edge of bankruptcy. I modernized the fleet, implemented a new data-driven routing system I designed myself, and landed 2 major regional contracts that made us profitable for the first time in a decade. My father's speech had returned, halting but present. My mother's cancer was in remission. We were turning a corner. And then, one Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang. It was Matthew. He stood on the porch, clean-shaven and clear-eyed, holding a single duffel bag. "I'm clean," he said. "Finished a program." My mother ran from the kitchen and collapsed into his arms, sobbing as if he'd returned from war. Within an hour, the house was filled with the smell of cinnamon rolls and the sound of my mother on the phone, announcing the return of the prodigal son. That was the day the rewriting of history began. Matthew's addiction became an entrepreneurial journey out west. His 2 years of radio silence were spun into a story of finding himself. By dinner, the official family narrative was set. Matthew had never been an addict, he'd been in training to take over the world. The next day, he walked into the office like he owned the place. My parents introduced him to the management team, men and women whose jobs I had saved, as the future of the company. The chief operating officer, a man I had promoted, asked Matthew if he wanted his corner office repainted. A week later, my corporate email account was deactivated. My access to the financial servers was revoked. When I asked my father about it, he just shrugged. "Your mother thinks it's time Matthew took the reins. You've done enough, Sophia." The dismissal was so casual it felt like a physical blow. I kept going to the office, slipping in through a side door and working from an empty cubicle, fixing the pricing errors and logistical nightmares Matthew created with his buzzword-filled bravado. One evening, I was heading home late when I heard my parents talking in the study. I stopped outside the door. "She's being so dramatic about all this," my mother was saying, her voice laced with irritation. "Acting like some kind of martyr. We all had to make sacrifices. She needs to understand that her role was temporary. Matthew is the heir. It's his birthright." My father murmured something in agreement. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was an erasure. 5 years of my life, of my relentless, soul-crushing effort, hadn't just been forgotten, they were being treated as an inconvenience. In that moment, standing in the dim hallway, the hurt inside me didn't just break. It calcified. It turned into something cold, hard, and perfectly clear. They had decided my sacrifice meant nothing. I decided I would make them remember. The next morning, I called my attorney, Lisa Roth. Matthew's reign was a masterclass in incompetence. He spent $80,000 on a consultant who recommended changing the company logo. He tried to fire our most experienced logistics manager for questioning his plan to disrupt the supply chain by eliminating half our trucks. I spent my days in my hidden cubicle, working through back channels to undo the damage, but it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with masking tape. Worse, I started noticing things. Invoices for a new, consulting firm, based in Nevada with a P.O. box address. Large, unitemized expense reports Matthew was approving for himself. He wasn't just incompetent, he was getting ready to steal. He was going to gut the company I had bled for and leave nothing but a hollowed-out shell. While he was clumsily setting up his shell companies, I was meeting with Lisa Roth in her quiet, downtown office. "It's perfect, Sophia," she said, tapping a thick stack of documents on her desk. "We call it a legal fortress." She explained the structure with cool precision. Using the durable power of attorney, which was still legally ironclad since my parents never formally revoked it, I would transfer 98% of the company's voting shares into a newly created irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust, she emphasized, is a vault. Once the assets are inside, they cannot be taken out. Not by you, not by them. Not by anyone. The trustee, she explained, would be her. The trust would lie dormant, an invisible entity holding near total control of Vance Logistics. But Lisa had added a brilliant, vicious little mechanism. "We're including a trigger clause," she said, a small smile on her face. "A specific event that will cause the trust to activate its full authority, freezing all assets and transferring operational control to the trustee, me." I looked at her. "What's the trigger?" "Any official attempt to transfer ownership or control of the company's core assets," she said. "Like, for example, a public announcement at a dinner party that your father is giving the entire company to your brother." It was more than a shield, it was a loaded gun, aimed directly at their greed. While Matthew was faking invoices for a few $100,000, I was signing the paperwork to move an entire $112 million empire into a legal cage he couldn't see. He had scheduled a large wire transfer to his Nevada shell company for 10 o'clock on the night of the inheritance dinner, assuming he would be in control by then. He thought he was staging a secret little theft. He had no idea I had already built a fortress around the entire kingdom, and he was about to hand me the key to lock the gates forever. My father's roar still echoed in the dining room as he held the first page of the document, his hand trembling. He forced himself to read aloud, his voice cracking with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Pursuant to the authority granted under the validly executed Minnesota Durable Financial Power of Attorney, dated October 12, 2018, Sophia Vance, as attorney in fact, did transfer 98% of all Class A voting shares of Vance Logistics, Incorporated, into the Vance Family Irrevocable Trust." He stopped, sucking in a breath. "The transfer was executed and filed with the state of Minnesota 18 months ago." He looked up, his eyes wild. "While I was still recovering? While your mother was in chemo?" I said nothing. A board member and old family friend, Robert, suddenly looked down at his phone, which had buzzed on the table. He paled. "Michael," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I just got an alert from the bank. A legal notification. It's the trust. All company operating accounts, the lines of credit, everything has been frozen, effective immediately." The words landed like a bomb. My aunt dropped her wine glass. My mother made a small, wounded sound and slid from her chair, caught by a cousin before she hit the floor. It was Matthew who finally exploded. He shot to his feet, his face purple with rage, and pointed a shaking finger at me across the room. "What did you do?" he screamed, a vein throbbing in his neck. "My transfer. The wire transfer was scheduled for 10 o'clock tonight. It won't go through." In his panic, he had just confessed to attempted embezzlement in front of a room full of board members and witnesses. Robert stared at him, his face a mask of dawning comprehension. My father, oblivious, kept reading from the next page, his voice rising to a frantic shout. "The trust is to be managed by a sole, independent trustee, Lisa Roth, Esquire, upon activation of the trigger clause, defined herein as any formal attempt to divest control from the acting CEO, the trustee is directed to assume all financial and operational authority." He finally let the pages fall from his hand, scattering across the table. "This can't be legal," he whispered. Robert shook his head slowly. "It's an irrevocable trust, Michael. And she used a valid POA to create it. It's a fortress. We're locked out. The company we're sitting in doesn't belong to you anymore." My father sank into his chair as if his strings had been cut. Matthew lunged across the table, knocking over glasses, grabbing for the papers. "We'll sue. "We'll destroy you," he shrieked at me. I finally looked at him, my expression unreadable. "You can't sue from prison, Matthew." The room fell into a stunned, horrified silence, broken only by the sound of Robert's phone buzzing again with another notification, another gate slamming shut on the empire they thought was theirs. The collapse was swift and total. The bank freeze triggered a default on their largest loans. Within 2 weeks, Vance Logistics filed for bankruptcy, which was quickly converted to a liquidation. The trucks were auctioned off. The headquarters was sold to a real estate developer. The company my grandfather had built and I had saved simply ceased to exist. Matthew was arrested 2 days after the dinner for attempted wire fraud. His public confession had made the case airtight. He was sentenced to 36 months in a federal penitentiary. My parents lost the house next. The mortgage was in their name, and with the company gone, they had no income. The bank foreclosed. They moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat, living on Social Security and my father's meager pension. They filed 3 different lawsuits to try and break the trust. Each one was dismissed. The power of attorney was valid. The trust was irrevocable. Minnesota law was clear. 9 months later, I stood in my office on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper downtown. The name on the glass door read Vance Logistics. I had used the company's non-physical assets, the routing software I'd designed, the client relationships I'd built, the operational data I'd collected, as the foundation for a new venture, funded by the trust. We had just gone public. Our initial offering valued the company at $1.9 billion. My office is quiet. There are no family photos, nothing to remind me of the past. My mother sent one email from a public library computer. "We're sorry. We have nothing left." I deleted it without replying. Sometimes, reporters ask if I feel guilty. They want a story of revenge, a woman haunted by the wreckage she created. But I don't feel vengeful. I don't feel triumphant either. I feel a profound and unshakable quiet. The quiet I earned over 5 years of sleepless nights and lonely hospital vigils. I didn't destroy a family. I protected a sacrifice. I refused to let 5 years of my life become a footnote in the story of my brother's unearned inheritance. I built something new from the ashes, creating hundreds of jobs and innovating an entire industry. This was never about taking something from them. It was about ensuring they could not take anything more from me. The past is a closed book, and their names are not written in my future. The life I have now, this quiet, this success, it isn't a trophy. It's a fortress, built of my own resilience, and its walls are finally high enough that their voices can't reach me anymore.